Welcome to the Landlord Diaries, where we talk about midterm rentals and the opportunities behind them. We'll share landlord stories, talk about maximizing investment potential, and discuss how to live the very best landlord life. This podcast is proudly brought to you by Furnished Finder, the leader and largest online marketplace for midterm rentals. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoy our content.
It's your host team of the Landlord Diaries, Kelly Bailey and Katie Lyon, coming to you from the Furnished Finder marketing team. We are both midterm rental investors ourselves with around 10 doors each. And we have a great episode today with Bailey Kramer, who is a Furnished Finder powerhouse user, and he has some fantastic tips. Katie, what were your main takeaways?
He is a power user, and I think, we do get into some details here with pricing strategy and calendar management, which are two really hot topics for Furnished Finder landlords, especially those who might use short-term rentals either seasonally or to fill in gaps. So we talked really in detail with that and some pricing strategies, which were really great. We went into really, really good details there. So everybody's going to have some great takeaways there. And he's just like a guy of action, right? He's young. He's all about just making moves and diving in and exploring. And I think the joy with midterm rentals is it's very easy to pivot if you need to pivot, either small pivots with your pricing or amenities or larger ones with your strategy or anything like that. So it's great to kind of talk about his portfolio and how he's put all of these things into play. So we hope you enjoy, and don't forget to subscribe wherever you're listening to this so that you can always get the freshest content and be getting the most up-to-date and relevant information on midterm rentals. Enjoy.
At 23 years of age, Bailey Kramer did not choose to pursue college, but instead full-time real estate investing. Why, you ask? Bailey is cash flowing over $12,000 per month with a handful of owned and managed midterm rental properties in Indiana, Illinois, and North Carolina. Bailey, I'm excited to hear your story today. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
I get a little confused sometimes because my last name is Bailey, so it's kind of like I recognize that name every second.
That's funny.
So yeah, we're gonna have some fun with it today. So you are 23 right now, I believe.
Yep.
What led you to become a successful real estate investor at a young age?
Yeah, for sure. So, what started off for me, what started off for a lot of people I know, is Rich Dad Poor Dad. So I read that book my sophomore year of college, and that's what introduced me to real estate, and that opened up a whole can of worms about, from real estate. But even before I read the book, I always knew I wanted to do something entrepreneurial, something where I could be my own boss, I can create my own time freedom. So I always knew that was going to happen some way, shape, or form. I had no idea it was going to be through real estate until reading the Purple Bible, Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever played the Rich Dad Poor Dad board game, Cash Flow?
No, I haven't. I've seen it though.
You should check it out. My brother-in-law is our realtor for our Austin properties, and he loves that game just for strategy and being able to scale.
That's cool.
He always wins when we play. So, Bailey, we've had a number of episodes featuring guests that started real estate investing at a young age. So now you are one of those episodes. We have episodes 17, 24, 54, 60, and I'm sure quite a few others. But what are some of those challenges that you've had to overcome, such as learning a new industry, finding lenders and partners? And let's talk about one or two of those large obstacles and how you overcame them.
Yeah, so there's been a ton of big obstacles, I'd say, but really the first one that I think a lot of people go through, and I went through myself, was just getting to that first property. That's always the hardest one, the scariest one, because it's like when you know the lease, you have no track record. You're basically just all talk at that point. And that's how I was from basically the moment I read Rich Dad Poor Dad. I told everyone about real estate. I talked about how great it was. And it wasn't until about a little bit over a year later from me just talking about it to me actually getting that first property. So, over that year's time, there's probably, I could name probably a million different challenges. And I would say like the first one and the one that hurts sometimes the most is just that is like the fear of getting to the first one, that
Yeah.
like unknown of how you're going to do it. I remember just like feeling also bad because I would talk about real estate so much, but I just didn't know how to get to that first one. So then you start to hear all these like outside pressures. So that's like that was definitely like the biggest challenge I'd say starting out for me, and I know for a lot of people.
Yeah, which I think they call that like you feel that imposter syndrome when it's just a self pressure more than anything else from someone else. So then the actual, like when you got into your first property, what was one of those obstacles that you're like, oh man, that's a big challenge. Let's keep rolling through it and figure it out.
Yeah. So, I mean, just getting that first property itself, like it took a couple months literally of just cold calling and cold texting, basically vacant properties and like pulling lists from PropStream to try to just find a property that would be a good deal. So just that process alone took a couple months. Then we had to raise, it was like $120,000, $130,000 for the first property. Then we had to renovate it. So everything I was doing it for the first time. So like there wasn't one part of the process where it was like, oh yeah, this part's easy. Every piece had its own challenge.
Yeah, for sure.
So tell us kind of how you grew the portfolio and what your current portfolio looks like.
Totally. So starting out, the way that I initially started growing was with partners. So I mentioned college, and a lot of people have their own, I guess, strengths and their own background advantages. For me, I would say my biggest advantage was like I had a great family growing up, and I think that's a huge advantage. One thing I didn't have though, and again, this isn't a bad thing for people who do, but something I didn't have was I didn't have family who invested with me in these properties. So that's just like something where a lot of people hear, oh yeah, your dad must have just given you all the money to invest in the properties, which is not true. This actually just came from partnering with other people that I literally met, and it sounds kind of stupid that I did this. Maybe it's scary, but I literally met people through like the Bigger Pockets forums, through Facebook groups, and that's how I literally started partnering with people that I've
That
never
sounds
met.
smart, not stupid. Very
Yeah,
smart.
well, in hindsight, when I'm like, man, I've never met these people ever, and I'm
Uh-huh.
just gonna trust them. It sounds a little crazy, but it's just kind of normal, I think, in the real estate world. But looking back, I was
Yeah.
like, wow, I was a sophomore in college. I think it was even more crazy that these people who were older than me decided to partner with me. But at the end of the day, I brought hustle and time to the table. I ended up scaling, to answer your question, scaling with these partners till I got to 6 properties. Then I hit a kind of a point where I was like, okay, I was entering my like senior year of college and actually like halfway through it. And I kind of hit a point of what is the future going to hold? And I was like, all right, like I've gotten a lot of experience. I learned a ton in those just from those 6 properties alone. And I made the pivot there to essentially say, you know what? I want to go out on my own and do this solo. So I sold the 6 properties that I had invested with the partners. And that's when I just started going, buying properties myself. And then also kind of at the same time as when I owned the properties with the partners, I started co-hosting for other people who had Airbnbs. So that kind of happened simultaneously. It took some time to happen. But to answer your question, I now have 3 properties that I own. 2 of them are single family houses, and then one's a triplex. And then I co-host about, I don't even know, like an extra 8 units or so.
Katie and I are like that. I'm like, what number is it today, Katie?
Yeah.
How many doors do you have today?
Yep.
And then what are you using those for? Are they all short-term rentals? Are they all midterm rentals? Do you mix them? What is kind of your rental strategy there?
Yeah. So big evolution. It started out fix and flipping, then it went to long-term rentals, then it went to short-term rentals, then it went to midterm rentals, and that's what I've stuck with for probably the past 2 years now, maybe a little bit longer, 2.5 actually, where I've just been doing 90+% midterm rentals for the properties I own for most of my co-hosting clients. And then I still have a couple properties I co-host that are in vacation markets. So those in the summertime we'll do short-term rental, wintertime we'll do midterm rental, or short-term
Awesome.
rental in the summer, midterm
Yeah.
in the winter.
And I think you fill the gaps. Like, it's nice when you can fill any gaps with your midterm rentals with short-term rentals, because if you're in a neighborhood where, you have a 30-day minimum, or, you haven't been approved for short-term rentals, well, then a lot of midtermers don't like to book too far ahead, because then you might have a larger gap that you can't fill because you're not able to do short-term. So you've really maximized there with being able to do mainly the midterm rental strategy and flex with the short term, whenever either to fill the gaps or when it's really happening in those vacation markets. So that's brilliant. And I think your cash flow and your breakdown is you've got, around 7,000 per month for the properties that you own, and around 10,000 per month for the co-hosting properties. So we're going to come to a conversation a little bit about pricing strategies, which Bailey is very good at, and how to maximize the revenue at your property. So we're going to get there. But first, Bailey, one of the things that we talked about on your intro call was that you mentioned Furnished Finder is a huge part of your business, with about 90% of your triplex bookings coming from Furnished Finder and over 50% of your single family home bookings. How would you compare Furnished Finder to other online travel agencies, and what are some of those differences that stand out to you in the Furnished Finder process?
Yeah, totally. So Furnished Finder, I mean, the two big platforms for me are like Furnished Finder and Airbnb. So I'd say the two biggest differences between Furnished Finder and Airbnb for me is really the fact that I guess the demographic that I'm targeting on Furnished Finder, which is mainly travel nurses and insurance companies, I'm getting more of those people coming through Furnished Finder than I am through Airbnb. I think it just makes more financial sense for the renter, the travel nurses, to go through Furnished Finder because the fees are less. There's no fees, aka less than the fees on Airbnb. So it just makes it easier for everybody, and more cost efficient that way. But I also think it's nice that since the term is longer, it gives the opportunity to talk with the host directly on Furnished Finder, which also makes it really nice,
Yeah.
because if you're staying with someone for like a week or weekend, you might not care too much about talking with the host. But if you're going to stay for 3 months or longer, that's when people tend to care a little bit more, in my opinion, just from what I've seen. So that's like another huge advantage of Furnished Finders. You can just talk to them directly.
Today's episode is proudly sponsored by Furnished Finder, the ultimate platform for hassle-free midterm rentals. Whether you're a seasoned landlord or just getting started, Furnished Finder has everything you need to find your next tenant. With Furnished Finder, you can say goodbye to booking fees, markups, and commissions, and hello to direct bookings. If you're ready to experience all the benefits renting your property for 30 days or more, head over to furnishedfinder.com, where you can list your property for one low annual price. We make it easy to get started.
All right, so you have some really insightful research tips on as far as checking MTR demand, which is always a hot topic. So let's go into those a little bit, and tell us about those. I believe you talk about how to search the nation and find where people would like to travel with an MTR, and then to check the supply in an area. So give us a little bit of details about how you
Yeah,
do
totally. So with midterm rentals, like one of the biggest hacks that I do to find markets and locations that are not saturated for midterm rentals is I'll first go on Airbnb and I'll essentially just search an area. And it also, just one quick thing, it comes down to who you're actually targeting, and knowing your demographic, because there's all types of properties, there's all types of bedroom counts. So what I like to do is you really use this test for targeting families. So for me, this is like, okay, this is for insurance company bookings where families going to stay at my property. So what I'll do is I'll go on Airbnb, and if I've never been in the area before, which for the two properties I invest in, or for the two areas where I invest in, before I bought properties there, I've never been there in my life. So I've used this and done this many times. And I've done this in other markets too, where I haven't yet bought a property yet, but I'm just waiting for the right one to pop up to do this.
You only have one in North Carolina, right? And the rest are in other states?
Yep. So what I do is I go on Airbnb, and just to find out the good locations for a family friendly place is I literally just poke around on the available listings on Airbnb, and I'll just start looking at the reviews. The reviews don't lie. People will share if the area is super terrible, sketchy, not somewhere they want to be at night. On the flip side, they'll tell you if an area is really good, safe to walk, family friendly, all that stuff. So that's the first thing I'll do is just to find out the area, because whenever I'm
Good tip.
talking to realtors, I always tell them the only thing that I really need you for is to be my second, eyes to let me know, is this an area where you'd want your family to live for 3 to 6 months? If they tell me yes, like that's like the biggest sign. And that's why I use that Airbnb test to see the reviews. So that's like the first thing of just picking the location. Now, as far as seeing the supply, what I do is, like, today is April 9th. So if I'm looking at a market, I would look out typically 5 to 7 days out. So 5, 7 days would be April 14th to the 16th or 17th. And I'm going to look, see how many properties are available if I want to book, again, April 15th to 3 months out. So that's April, March, or April, May, June, July. So I'm looking for April 15th to July 15th. And I want to see how many properties are available in this market. And then what you can also do is filter it down to what type of property is going to meet your demographic. Like, again, I said family. So for me, I'm looking for 3 bedrooms or 2 bathrooms or greater. So if I put that filter of 3 beds, 2 baths, I use this test a lot. Like, if you look in Orlando, Florida, and do that test, there's thousands of properties available. So you can absolutely do midterm rental there, and there is a lot of demand because there's just a lot of houses there, a lot of people there, but it's really hard to stand out from the crowd because there's so many properties available. Versus if you do this in
Yeah.
smaller markets, Orlando's just huge, but in these smaller markets, and you do that test, you typically see sometimes no properties will pop up. Like, sometimes literally there won't be anything available. Sometimes just one, sometimes
Wow.
5. But I like to invest in markets where there's like less than 5 that pop up. That way I'm pretty much the clear choice, especially, and we'll talk about like the pricing side of things, especially if you keep your pricing strategy and your minimum night stay settings tight, you may be the only choice in your market, which is what I like.
All right, I like what you're saying here, and I like the fact that there can be different amounts of supply in different areas, and even in a place that has a lot of supply, you might be the only one of that property type or something, or that size, but you need to really dig into it because you need to know kind of what your approach is. That might change if you're going to do midterm rental full year, if you're going to do a hybrid situation, kind of what target tenant you're looking after. So all of that has to be in alignment, right? So you hinted on pricing, and I really want to dive in there because it's such a hot topic for our landlords. So let's just go ahead and skip right to it. Talk to us kind of about your pricing strategy and kind of how you go about setting your numbers to maximize your cash flow, but also to maximize that occupancy, because a midterm rental is no good if nobody's not in it.
Totally. So
Nobody's not in it.
Yeah.
We're going to go with
for
that.
sure. So the biggest thing with pricing, like, when people think pricing, they think about like the numbers. How much am I going to rent the property per month? And that is super important, but that's really secondary to the minimum night stay settings, because if you don't have the minimum night stay settings correct, literally your pricing doesn't matter. Like, it makes no difference what you're going to price your property at if your minimum night stay settings aren't correct. So the way that I like to do it, and this also depends on if your property is in a seasonal market versus if your property is just in some random market where there's really no peak season. It's just kind of the same all year round. So just to give an example, like for my properties that are kind of just in the Midwest, not in the vacation market, I'll have it so that if someone wants to book my property, let's just say a month in advance, they have to stay for at least 30 days. If they want to book my property 60 days in advance, then they have to stay at my property for at least 60 days. The only time I will lower that minimum requirement is if they want to book it a week in advance, or sometimes 2 weeks. It just depends on how my other properties are performing and kind of balancing my risk a little bit. But if someone's going to do a short-term stay, it's got to be on a short notice for me, because kind of what I mentioned before is when that insurance claim booking comes in or that inquiry comes in, I want my property to be available. If my property is not available, I'm going to completely lose out on the opportunity to house that guest. And that's where a lot of people mess up, is a lot of these hosts are scared to have an empty calendar in the future. So they say, you know what? I got this inquiry for 2 nights in 4 weeks from now. I'll just take it to feel good. So they take that booking, and then all of a sudden they only have 2 days booked over the next 6 months. But since they have 2 days booked, they completely lose the opportunity to get that longer stay because they have a block in their calendar. So that's like the first part.
This is smart. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is smart, especially for like when you're hybriding the two, right, of short term and midterm, because you have to pick which one is your primary, right? Are you a short term primary and then you're going to fill in off season or something with midterm? Or are you going to do primarily midterm and you're going to fill in gaps with short term? If you try to not pick one of those two, your calendar is going to be a mess. I think this is also a good reminder to everybody that you can set your minimum stay requirement on Furnished Finder. And you can also discuss that. Since it's not a direct booking platform, you can have those conversations with people. And like Bailey is saying, you can be like, oh, you're looking at a calendar date that's X far in the future. Like, my requirement for that far of a commitment out is this amount of a stay. Like, it gives you the chance to have these kind of gray areas that you can really kind of customize. So, okay, carry on,
Yeah.
Bailey. I just wanted to quickly interrupt you because those things I think were really good.
Totally, you're good. So that's like the minimum night stay stuff. That's 80%. It's like the 80-20 rule. That's like 80%. You got to have that right. Now, as far as the pricing goes, this is kind of a funny topic because I'll just share. So what I do for my pricing to set the pricing is I'll just go first on Furnished Finder and I'll literally just look at what are the other properties priced at, right? And I'll just get my pricing depending on if my property is nicer, less nice compared to the bedroom count. And I'll just get kind of an average right there. I'll also look on Airbnb, see the properties available. And on Airbnb, they're always just a little bit more because of the fees and stuff. So you kind of just have to say, okay, if it's $3,500 on Airbnb, but $3,000 on Furnished Finder, you're still looking at around $3,000. So just whatever. But what I've realized is the pricing that I've been able to charge, because what I've done over the past like 2 years is I've slowly increased my prices, and it's not something that I would have just seen on Airbnb or Furnished Finder. And it's not even something that the insurance companies that I work with would even just like, there's no way of just knowing up front. So what I always say and what I do is when I'm buying a property and I'm trying to figure out how much money I'm going to bring in, I'll just use Furnished Finder as like base price. I always know deep down I can beat it and go higher, but that's like base price. And then what I've been able to do to really raise the prices, I mean, as in like, just to give it like real examples here, I was charging, I think my price was like in my head, I think $2,500 for one of my properties that I wanted per month. And an insurance company, I was talking to them over the phone, and and this rarely happens, but it's just from trying to listen and poke some holes in these people. They said, hey, does $3,500 work for you? And I was like, absolutely, $3,500 works for me. So, and I don't remember if that one came through their Airbnb or Furnished Finder or how I even got the lead. But that was just from an insurance company letting me know that I can get $3,500 for my property, and that is a number that would work for them. So I was like, great. Instead of $2,500 in my head being my new minimum, which I found on Furnished Finder as kind of what I thought I can get, I said, okay, $3,500 is my new threshold because I know someone's willing to pay it. Then recently, like as in less than 2 weeks ago, I was talking to a guy, and where did the lead come from? This one came from, I think it came from Furnished Finder, to be honest with you. And they were interested in my property. So long story short, they came to look at the property, and unfortunately, it was a good area, but it was just too far south to where they wanted to be for their kid's school. So what they ended up telling me, I was talking to the guest, is they said, man, I really like your property, and our only other option is this piece of crap property for $5,100 a month. And he said, he mentioned in there that they were already approved to stay at that property. He just he didn't feel good in his soul to stay at some terrible property and give these landlords all this money for a bad property. But the
Right.
main thing here is he told me that he was approved for $5,100. So I'm thinking in my head, if he was approved for $5,100 and I was only asking $3,500, I know I can go up more. I'm still not going to just increase it to 5,000 because something about that also doesn't really sound right to me. Like I think it has to be a win-win, and it would be a huge win for me and potentially for them too. So I don't know. I haven't. I'm not saying just jack up your price just for the sake of it, but I would never have known that I would be able to get 5,100 if it wasn't from talking to this guest.
Hey landlords, are you ready to level up your rental game and simplify your midterm rental business? Well, get ready to meet your new best friend, KeyCheck. KeyCheck is your all-in-one solution for stress-free property management. With tenant-paid screenings, online rent payment processing, custom lease creation, and a suite of incredible landlord tools, you'll wonder how you ever lived without it. No more chasing down checks or sifting through piles of applications. KeyCheck helps you organize and manage all things landlording in a simple and efficient way. Make landlord life a breeze with KeyCheck, the game changer for modern property owners. Visit keycheck.com to unlock the power of stress-free property management and take your rental business to new heights.
A lot of times with midterms, you need to get in there and start talking to people before you realize what type of tenant has what budget for your type of property, right? It's not as cut and dry as a short-term rental where you've got average daily rates and you've got all of this data to pull, because it's not just vacationers, right? You have insurance claims, you have families, you have executives, you've got interns, you've got the traveling medical professionals, and all these people's budgets are all over the place. So it's like you really, like, you're not going to know the temperature of the water until you get in there and start swimming. So I like that you're doing, and that you're not just saying, okay, well, you were approved for 5,000, I'm just going to charge 5,000 now, but you're matching that kind of with your integrity and the value of your property, and knowing kind of, okay, well, what is a fair market value for my rental? I think everything you're saying there is very good. And just to encourage everybody, especially on Furnished Finder, it's very easy to change things, you guys. It's so easy, but you can't change anything if you don't
Totally.
start. You have to get in there, put a price up, see how it does, right? And then you can flex it as much as you
Yep.
want, as much as you want. But you're providing this value and this service, and that holds some weight.
I have a tip I want to add, that we all have these little quirky things that we do for our midterm rental businesses, but you don't always think about communicating them with others. And so this is something I haven't talked about on the show before, is the idea that once a booking comes in for a specific property, it's not like, okay, now I can sit back and chill for a little bit because this one's booked for 3 months. It's more, let me go ahead and plan ahead for the next one. So as soon as you get a booking, they pay those first move-in fees to secure the property. Well, now what's my next? The Furnished Finder calendar in its current form is very simple. All you have to do is put your next availability date. So I think, okay, they're going to be with me 3 months. They have a 90-day contract, or their remodel is supposed to be complete by this date. So I'm going to put that date as my next availability. I'm going to leave it live. And now I'm going to do exactly what Bailey's doing, is rather than whatever price I had it at, I can kind of set it a couple hundred higher because it's so far out. And now if someone wants to have that conversation ahead of time, well, now you know what your next bar is to reach, right? So I'm totally with you there, because that's exactly what I do is, and because midterm rentals aren't straightforward with the data, you don't all have all that data like you do on the short-term rental side. When you change pricing, it can actually largely be affected on the Furnished Finder map, because other people will then be encouraged. Oh, here's some gaps. I'm going to change my pricing too. And one of my neighborhoods has 5 to 7 properties on the same street, and I own 2 of them. So if I increase my pricing, because I'm booked, well, then that encourages them to try to get more for their properties as well. But like you're saying, not to be unrealistic in your market and not to do it just because, like, what's the highest dollar that you can get? It's to really meet those different avatars in your market. And there's so many variety of traveler types on Furnished Finder. So unless anybody wants to add something, we'll go to that next. Is there something you'd like to add, Bailey?
No, well, I just one more thing too. Just another example of how, and just another thing that just kind of came to mind that Katie mentioned is another way that I learned of just knowing the value of the property is I got an inquiry on my property that wasn't available, and that they were begging for it to be available. So I was like, unfortunately, it's already booked. They inquired on a different property of mine that was larger, and they said, and it was much more money. It wasn't the right avatar that we were targeting, but there was nothing available. So she said, "Hey, I'm willing to go up to this price," and it was like a couple $100 more than I would even think about for my property. So just like different ways of knowing that people are willing to pay more, but then also with that, and we talk about like not being greedy and stuff. I made the mistake of making my price too low, and I wouldn't even say it was a mistake because I did it on purpose just to get the ball rolling, and it was the first time I rented out this property. So it wasn't a mistake by any means, but the lesson that I learned from it was there were a couple. The guest wasn't needy. Yeah, they were a little bit needy, and they wanted me to fix things, and not fix things, like do things that were extra. Like the property was totally fine. There were some things that like the one of the water faucets or whatever needed to be replaced. That was legit. Then there were some other things that were like kind of nice to haves, but totally not required by me. And I did it for her anyways because I was just like, why not? But my
Yeah.
lesson that I learned there was like if I'm gonna go above and beyond as a host, regardless, I should be able to charge a price that reflects that. Because if I just charge a super low rate and then I go above and
Yeah.
beyond, then I'm kind of shooting myself in the foot. But if I just charge
Yeah.
a price that's fair for everybody and allows me to be a great host and even more, then it just makes more financial sense as well. So that was just something I learned too. And also like I don't feel bad necessarily charging more for my properties because I know that I'm gonna provide a premium service. So
Yeah. You know, this is, we don't talk about pricing much, so this is going to be really helpful for a lot of people, even though it's a longer section on pricing. And so the last thing I want to add that is very valuable is when you set your rate on Furnish Finder, well, you're still communicating with tenant leads. So when you have a rate like one of mine, I have at 3,200 right now. When I know I can get 2,950, but I have it at 3,200, and so when I see those tenant leads come in and they say their budget is from 2,400 to 2,800, well, maybe sometimes I won't even mention it, but depending on how close we are to the bookings, whether it's a longer stay, if they're going to be there more like 6 months or a year, they'll say, hey, I see the top end of your budget is 28, I can come down to that for you, and it can be a win-win for both of us. So that's the cool thing about tenant leads is you can see and kind of have those conversations just like we're talking about. So, all right, reaching your guest avatar sometimes can be a make or a break for your business. So, what are some marketing tips you have for other midterm rental hosts out there on, how do they know what their ideal guest is? Because a lot of people don't even know where to start. And how do you market to that guest once you figure it out?
for sure. So the main piece here, I'd say it comes down to two things. One, property size, and then two, amenities. So as far as property size goes, like I hear people who are like, hey, I had this 5-bedroom, 3-bath house. Like, should I rent this out to traveling nurses? And I'm not saying you can't because you could rent it by the room and that's totally fine. But you have to understand that that's going to be the strategy, like renting it by the room. Oh, I think a lot of people come into it a little more, I guess, blindly and not understanding that, like, for example, a traveling nurse, from my experience, they typically only need 1 bedroom. And a lot of the times people are coming solo. Sometimes they're coming with a spouse. So could they take a 2-bedroom? Absolutely. But all the inquiries I've gotten have been for people who are just looking for a 1-bedroom place. So for me, 1-bedroom properties is for me travel nurse central, and then on top of it, it goes into what do these travel nurses want amenity wise. So from there, and you can also just look at the comps and see, this is another way to kind of charge premiums, but what amenities do your guest avatar, do your competition have, and what do they not have? For example, washer and dryer in unit. That's like a super
Huge.
simple one that, yeah, it's so important to have. And you'll see people who have it, who have listings without a washer and dryer in unit. And those are typically the listings that are either way less, they're charging way less money because it's a huge deal to not have a washer and dryer in your unit. But that's like a simple thing that you can do to charge a premium and also just like have as a standard for your units. And then on the flip side is just, again, going back to the property size, is knowing, okay, if you're going to target insurance claims and families, relocate and stuff like that, the bigger the property, the better. Like if you go for a 1-bedroom property and you try to cater that towards an insurance claim, again, it doesn't mean you're not going to ever get one. It just, you're it's like the 80-20 rule, right? But probably even more like 90-10 for that situation. Those families are looking for larger houses. So knowing right off the bat, like what size property fits these different demographics. And really, like I would say for me so far, traveling nurses, the insurance claims, families relocating, and construction crews are kind of the 4 demographics that I've had experience with. And I'm excited for this midterm rental conference because I'm sure there's going to be more niches and more demographics that I learn about. And maybe that will help me as well say, okay, for a 1-bed, 1-bath property, this is also who it caters to. And then you kind of have multiple avatars for different size properties.
It's always changing, right? The tenant type and the demand is always changing in midterm rentals. And I also want to say that if you have any of these amenities, make sure that you check them in your Furnished Finder listing, because a lot of these, the tenant can, or the traveler can actually search, and they can mark that they're specifically looking for specific amenities when they are searching. So just a hot tip coming in for everybody there.
Yeah, they can filter on the app with like things such as king beds only or things like that. There's like good filters that you can figure out, if that's what you want, you can dig in deeper. I'm going to lean in a little bit to that washer dryer conversation because it's like you can guess what your avatar needs, but just as we're saying like so many times on this show, you really have to just jump in to figure it out, right? And so most of ours have built-in washer dryers, but I have 2 backyard cottages that don't have washer dryers. And you know what or dishwashers, and you know what the benefit is? It's an entire unit all to themselves at a low price. Where to get the lower prices, a lot of times you have to share a space or rent a room. And so it's like there's so many different ways you can navigate what your avatar is. And it's like if you think it's one, you can lean into it, but don't isolate your potential leads. Like some people, and if this is your style, go for it. Like no, whatever works best for you. But some people will lean and say medical house only. Well, what about relocations? And it's like it's so crazy once you get into your midterm rental markets, how many different reasons people are coming to an area. Like we've got a ton of people coming for electrical work right now in one of our cities, like solar farm. They're building a solar farm. Tesla and Samsung are building like crazy in the Austin area. So you'll see a lot of requests for Samsung employees or Tesla employees. So there's always tons of reasons why people are coming to the area. So we're down to our last 2 questions. And I think we got about 5 minutes, so we'll knock them out real quickly. Katie, I'm going to let you take lead on the out-of-state management tips.
Yeah, so give us just some quick hitters on some out of state management tips, because I know some of your properties are out of state, and sometimes that can feel a little bit intimidating for people, but it doesn't have to be.
Totally. Biggest thing, I mean, a couple tips. Number one, you got to have a good team. That team kind of sounds fancy. Like you at least need one absolute rock star. The more rock stars, the better. But if you have one rock star, they can completely make or break your ability to operate a property remotely. So that's the first one. The second thing is I use Walmart Plus to help me so much. So it's kind of like Amazon Prime, except it comes faster than Amazon. It can come within 2 hours usually. And that's helped me a ton of times in situations where, let's say, the heat's not working and it's 8 p.m. or 7 p.m. and it's like I gotta order some heaters from Walmart. That's coming clutch too many times. But I would say that's another huge tip. Yeah, those are kind of my two big ones, I'd say.
And finding that lead person on your team, where have you found is the best place that you find? Is it from your agent or is it from TaskRabbit, or where do you find your people?
Yeah, I found a lot of good people from my real estate agent asking her, like, hey, who do you recommend for a contractor? Who do you recommend for this? And then another thing that I've done is a lot of times I found really good cleaners who also double as my runners and stuff. So the way that I'll do that is I'll just basically go on Google typically. I'll just start calling the cleaners. I'll ask them if they have Airbnb experience. And you can tell pretty fast and just from talking to somebody if they're willing to go above and beyond and do what we need as Airbnb hosts. Some cleaners are like, I only clean properties. If you want me to do anything for you, like, no. Of course, we pay them for it, but they're like, we don't do that. We only clean. So those people I don't really work with. But those people who are like, yeah, I clean Airbnbs and even sometimes I do extra tasks. I'm like, you're the one right there.
Yeah, for sure.
I love that. A good team is so important, and a good cleaner is so important. And I know you know, because all of my midterm rentals are out of state as well, and we've had several times where I'm like, they're like, you know, the supply bin is out of toilet paper. I'm like, okay, can you go buy some? Like, I'll keep paying you for your time, but like, can you just go buy some? And if you get the right people on your team, like they will, and that's so clutch. So, all right, last question for you, Bailey. I want to give you the opportunity to let everybody know kind of the content that you provide that's helpful for anybody interested in midterm rentals or investing in general, how to connect with you, kind of what value you can offer back. So yeah, let us know or share that with our listeners, because I know that you have such great insights and information that you share on your own channels as well.
Yeah, totally. Thanks. So, like the biggest place where I'm dropping crazy information is on YouTube. A lot of it's like sharing my screen and just like walking through like real stuff. That's what was most helpful for me in every facet of real estate that I've dove into, from the long-term rentals to midterm rentals, short-term rentals, stuff like that. So that's what I'm kind of doing, giving backside of just like a lot of documenting. I actually did a call with a inquiry from Furnished Finder. It was like a lot of bleeping out and a lot of like I had to cross a lot of things out, but it was just like cool to show the actual process. Like literally from the second my phone got a notification, I hit the record button and started showing calling. So that was kind of cool. So a lot of stuff like that on the channel, and then Instagram, I share some of that as well.
What are your channels so we can make sure and they can look it up? What's the name of your YouTube channel?
YouTube, I think it's just my name, to be honest. You can just look up Bailey Kramer. I think that's it. And then on Instagram, you can probably just look up my name too, but it's _Bailey_Kramer. Someone has Bailey Kramer just without any of the special spaces, so I need to like buy it off of them or something. But for now, it's just __ Bailey_Kramer.
Got it. Well, we will also have it in the show notes as well. So if you'd like to connect with Bailey or hear more of his story, feel free to give him a call on his Furnished Finder listing or look up his website. It'll all be in the show notes. We appreciate you being here with us today. Tons of great tips. This was a great episode for you to share with your friends that are looking to either get started on Furnished Finder or already have a Furnished Finder account. And we just appreciate y'all so much. If you're loving our show, please don't forget to like, subscribe, or comment. And we'd love your 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you next week.